Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today on our flash webinar focused on grassroots advocacy. My name is Hannah Laux. I work with government relations here at NSTA. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. So you'll notice that you're on mute. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everyone. So we want this to be an interactive webinar. We want you to ask questions, so please feel free. You do have the ability to mute yourself on your end to reduce background noise. We kind of encourage you to do that. So you'll also notice that there's a command center within the webinar, so you can type your questions in here, but also raise your hand as well if you don't feel comfortable interrupting, and we'll be sure to call on you. So today we have the pleasure of hosting Rich Kelly of R.C. Kelly Law Associates and Becky Weber of Prime Policy. Together, Rich and Becky, along with other members of NSTA, Prime Policy Group, and R.C. Kelly Law Associates, make up NSTA's advocacy team. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Rich and Becky. But really quickly before I do, you'll notice in the handouts portion of our webinar command center, you will see two handouts that have already been uploaded. Those would be the Grassroots Toolkit that we're going to be referencing, as well as the Boosting the Bus-In packet. Rich is going to go into a little bit more detail about both of these things, but if you want to take a look at them, we strongly encourage you to do so as you follow along with this presentation. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Rich and Becky.
All right, thanks. This is Rich Kelly, and like Hannah said, we've also got Becky dialing in from Washington, D.C., and also with us is Kurt Mackison, who is the incoming executive director for the National School Transportation Association. Really appreciate you guys making time today for this presentation. It's all about grassroots advocacy and secondarily, or I'll say equally importantly, boosting the message that we just delivered in Washington, D.C. at the annual Bus-In event on May 1st. By all means, in this presentation, Becky is the master of this genre, coming from Washington and working for the Prime Group. Hannah and I and Kurt, we do regulatory work for NSTA, and we were involved in putting together what's called the Grassroots Advocacy Toolkit, which is one of the documents that is uploaded for you guys in this presentation. So the way we're going to run this is I'm going to run through just kind of the basics of grassroots advocacy, and I've asked Becky to jump in as she sees fit as we run through these things, and I'll probably refer off to her for some supplemental thoughts and information as well. And when we run through that, we'll then talk more specifically about using those concepts to actually deliver the NSTA's Bus-In message about the dangers of illegal passing. So if you give me the next slide there, Hannah, that'd be ideal. So most recently, NSTA, 50 people from NSTA went to Washington, D.C. on May 1st, and it was part of an annual event. Each year, NSTA goes to Washington to meet with elected officials there in the Senate and in the House of Reps, and looks to deliver a message each year in support of the school bus industry. This year's message was all about the dangers of illegal passing. So obviously what you see on the slide there is the group that went, most of the group that went, and we'll talk about what was their message and how you can deliver it. So we're going to start off with the how you can deliver it part. I'll be walking through a PDF document that you have there, but we're not going to put that up on the slide. It will be available for you, and you have this, the idea being that this is kind of a train the trainer piece. You can use this information to empower your own people, employees, staff, you name it, to understand the message and to be able to foster relationships with their local elected representatives. So looking at the goal here of grassroots advocacy, why bother? Well, there's a lot of reasons, obviously. the point that we're going to talk about today is delivering the message about illegal passing and the Stop for School Buses Act. But that's this year's message. At any given time, you may have other messages of equal importance. I was just with the New Jersey School Bus Transportation Group earlier this morning, and they're gearing up to deliver a message to their state representatives about a state excise tax that they're looking to be exempted from. So whether your message is about what we're going to talk about today, the illegal passing, or something that's more local, the concepts are the same. The idea first is that you need to understand that you are empowered, especially as an owner of a business. I know a lot of contractors, a lot of small businesses may not feel like they're important or particularly authoritative, but just remember that you have a number of people working for you, and those people have households that vote. And I think that sometimes people underestimate the value of a constituent actually talking to their local elected official. And when I say local, I don't just mean those that represent your state, but those that have offices in your area that represent your interests in Washington, D.C. Some of the things that you want to do first is identify your targets. When I say identify the targets, that's understanding both the state and the federal level. At the federal level and at the state level, you have two houses of representation. One that is typically the Senate, one that is the House of Representatives. At the federal level, that Senate level is representing two from each state. And at the House, the structure is represented by a census, by the actual number of the population. So you have representatives from each of those at the federal level. And we're going to focus again on federal because the Stop for School Buses Act is a piece of federal legislation. If you don't already know who those people are, on the PDF document that you'll receive, there's a couple of links that you can go in, put in your zip code, your address, and it will actually direct you specifically to the website and the contact information of those Washington senators and representatives that represent your neighborhood. So the idea there is contact them, and not just contact them, but start to understand who they are and what issues perhaps they're already interested in. The easiest way to do that is get a look at their website. All of them have websites. They are perpetually promoting themselves and promoting their interests and promoting their causes. And it's pretty easy to find out where they stand on issues because they want you to know. One of the very, very easiest things to do is to sign up for their newsletters or their alerts. Now, I know you're probably thinking, last thing I need is more emails, but it is a very easy way to start to get a feel for where they are and what their interests are and perhaps what things motivate them. The other thing that you can do as well is, again, using the internet, set Google alerts that may be for either that particular representative or your particular issue, anything of that sort. Contacting them is as simple as an email or a phone call. And the one thing that you want to be aware of is that it's not critically important that you actually speak one-on-one with your particular representative because all of them have a massive staff of people that are helping them both in your local neighborhood and in Washington, D.C., and perhaps in other areas as well, too. I know one of the things that we did a lot in working with the Bus-In message was working with the staffers. And I know Becky always has some thoughts on the impressions you get when you meet with the staffers. If you're as old as I am, some of them are as old as your kids. Becky, I know that you've in the orientation and whatnot, talked a little bit about the age of the staffers and not to be put off by that.
Exactly. We're all getting older and they're getting younger. That's the main message. But you know, the average age of staffers on Capitol Hill is they're all almost a great majority are under 30, but they wield a lot of influence over legislation. So I always tell folks, don't be put off if you feel like you're meeting with, you know, the eighth 22-year-old in a row on a Bus-In day, because they are the window on these issues, you're usually going to be meeting with the transportation staffer, and they're going to take it up the chain in the office, and that's how we build support for the bill. So don't be intimidated by the age of the staffers.
Yeah, and Becky's right on the money on that one, especially on 2 points. Number one, that they're they're younger, but they're very sharp. They again, they know their stuff. And the other part of that is that they often specialize in certain areas. There may be a staffer in charge of all transportation issues or all education issues or all, whatever it is. So a lot of times, again, you may be shuffled off to a particular person that is not specifically the representative himself or herself. But a lot of times it's as important to get that staffer to understand your issue and your position, because that's their job. Their job is to know about transportation and the importance of the issues and things like that. So realistically, the better you can explain your position to that staffer, the better they can explain it to the representative or the senator. So a lot of times people will, when they reach out to their local representatives, get frustrated because they never get, past the first person they talk to. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, if you foster a relationship even with that person, that is sometimes as valuable as the representative themselves, because they're going to have more time to talk with you. They're going to remember who you are. And again, it's their job to do that and to facilitate the message. So the idea there is, reach out to them, and it doesn't have to be too complicated. Remember again that you run a business, and if you're running a school bus business, it's like America and apple pie. I mean, who doesn't want a picture as an elected official in front of a school bus that takes children to school and all that kind of good stuff? So don't be bashful about inviting them to events that you may have going on in your own office. It's the end of the school year. I know a lot of contractors are having either cookouts as a thank you to their drivers, or they might be having a breakfast as a thank you to their drivers. Call your local rep and ask if they or someone from their staff would be willing to come out and have breakfast with your however many drivers as a thank you, that sort of thing. Again, maybe they themselves can't make it. They may send a staffer. That's not a terrible thing. Or they may see it as a photo op. I'm going to go out, I'm going to shake the hand of my local constituents. I might actually get a picture on my website in front of a school bus. You've got a lot of power and a lot of influence in that sort of thing, and you should not be bashful about using that. The second part is to know your message before you engage with them. Now, your message for purposes of this presentation is going to be all about illegal passing and the illegal passing law. But if you don't have a current issue kicking around, like if you're going to engage with your state representatives can't necessarily vote for this piece of federal legislation, but it's probably equally important, to foster a relationship with them. And it's always easiest to foster a relationship with someone when you don't need something from them. So, don't limit yourself to calling the Washington reps in the House and in the Senate. You may also look at your local state representatives as well. And again, they certainly have an interest in you and your employees as voters and as constituents. But have a plan for what you're going to talk to them about. It's okay to talk about the dangers of illegal passing, to recognize that there's federal legislation there. But to let them know that you care about safety and about these things, or just simply that you'd like to thank them for their, representation, and you'd like them to meet your best drivers and things of that sort. So have an idea of what your message is, and then how you're going to deliver that message. Every one of these websites that you go to, you will see has some sort of portal where you can send a message to your representative. And it may be on their website, or it may be simply an email that is sort of a catch-all. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy or complex. It may be simply your invitation to your event, or it may be something like this school bus passing bill that you want them to support. You can put your message together, and I like the idea of getting a 2 or 3 point talking point on paper so that you have a refer to. And when you do make that phone call, you can get to the right person. I need to talk to somebody about illegal school bus passing legislation. So they'll probably route you to the person that handles transportation, or possibly the person that handles education, or both. And you'll be able to explain to them what it is that you want them to do. In this case, support the legislation. Or if it is simply an invitation to come out for a photo op, that could be part of it as well too. Again, don't be bashful about scheduling an invitation at your work site. A school bus operation is a compelling, non-controversial place to be. So they would likely be interested in coming out and doing that. Another thing that you can do is on the website, you will get information about their upcoming events. It's not unusual, especially this time of year, that you may have a representative that goes to the county fair, literally, and they're going out to shake hands and meet their constituents. Well, if you know that they're going to be at your county fair, go to the fair. Take the kids, have a blast. There's a place where in an informal setting, you can actually shake a hand, and you may get time in that forum to actually talk directly to the representative. Now, they may refer you to their transportation staffer or to someone else for the details, but you've had the opportunity to connect with them, to hand them a business card, to say, thank you so much. And it may be, again, the county fair. It might be that they're holding a town hall nearby. Kurt, you've seen stuff like that around here in Jersey, right?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing with that is if you do actually run into them at an event like that, I do lead with, hey, we met with Jenny Jones or Johnny Jones, your transportation person, on this legislation, and we had a very productive meeting. Want to thank you for that. Just want to reiterate our talking points at that point. Keep it short and succinct. Remember that they're in that situation to shake a lot of hands and kiss a lot of babies. But it is a good opportunity to reinforce the message.
Right. And that's like, on the money. If they're there to promote themselves, be sure you don't get in their way, but it's a good chance you probably have a chance to take a picture with them, I bet, and put that on your website. And again, the customers that you have will see that you are not just doing the day-to-day job, but also advocating for safety and for the industry and for things like that as well. So once you've made the connection, and again, we're going to talk about how to deliver the Bus-In message, it's important to continue that relationship. It may be a situation where you attend their fundraisers, or you're on their mailing list, so you get their newsletter. You know what's happening. It is an ideal thing to try to maintain some sort of familiarity with the people that represent you, both in state and federal government. If they were not able to make the year-end breakfast, in June, you get another bite of the apple when you invite your drivers back in August to prepare for the next school year. So maybe they couldn't make it in June. August is a better time for them. Don't be bashful about if you don't get the connection and don't get them to stop by the first time. Ask them the next time you have something like that going on. And it doesn't always have to be a big breakfast. For example, I know that there is a particular contractor I'm thinking of. They periodically recognize their accident-free drivers. So, if you've got a driver that's been accident-free for, 20 years, 10 years, whatever it is, and you're going to give them a certificate of recognition, chances are that representative or someone from their office would be willing to come out and do the photo op and shake a hand and things like that as well.
Yeah, and to the extent that you can get those photo ops, they're great to post on social media, and it helps reinforce the message, and the legislators are more aware of those social media postings than they'll let on to be.
Right. The other thing you can do, too, is by watching their website, you will become familiar with other things that are perhaps outside of the school bus industry that they have supported that you agree with. If you've got an opportunity to send them a message saying, thank you for your support of this issue or of that issue, that's actually got value as well, too, because people do notice that. So, by being in the mode of what they're doing, it may be something as simple as they supported the establishment of a local playground or park. Okay, simple, non-controversial. Send them an email. Thanks. Took my kids to that park. It's a great place, and we appreciate you doing that. it's those very, very simple things that give you the familiarity so that when you do call at some point in the future saying, I have an issue I'd like you to support, you're not just there for something for you. It's a two-way conversation. Before we launch specifically into the Bus-In message, Becky, I wanted to kind of throw it over to you to see if you might have something to add to just kind of the basics of Grassroots.
I would just say all politics are local. That's something Tip O'Neill is very famous for saying, and it's really true. And the other thing is just don't be intimidated. I think a lot of folks tell us they're intimidated to talk to their members of Congress. You are a voter, you're an employer, you're a job creator, you're a business, you're a taxpayer, and that gives you legitimacy to bring issues in front of your members of Congress. And they really ultimately they really do want to help you. If they can help you, they will want to help you. So it's just getting comfortable with making those asks and developing those relationships. One other thing is we always say the worst time to get to know your member of Congress is when you're in a emergency kind of DEFCON 5 situation where some issue has come up that's just a death-defying issue for your industry or your company. That's not when you want to make the first contact. So that's why we have been talking about building this foundation over time so that that is already there when you do need them.
Yep, and if we can help you at NSTA in any way to either become comfortable with that contact, or maybe your efforts haven't garnered the results you're looking for, and you're looking for some guidance, or you just want to talk about it, certainly call into the NSTA office, and you can speak with any one of us, and we can provide you with guidance. I know a couple of times we have actually participated with contractors that did get the meeting with their representatives, and it was just a situation where they said, well, gee, they're coming. Do you want to come too? And if we can make it work, then we'd certainly make that work. I know we had one this week. It was actually at the state level. Mike Burke in Pennsylvania. I got a call from a contractor that said my local rep is coming out to visit. Do you want to come along? And he showed up, and again, it's a good thing. So that's Grassroots conceptually. So now what we want to do is, using the PowerPoint presentation, we want to fit the Bus-In message into this Grassroots model so that we can say, okay, what is our message about illegal passing, and how can we deliver that to the representative? What's our end game? If you could give me the next slide, Hannah, I'll start off a little bit with the 2019 Capitol Hill Bus-In message. And Becky, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. This really kind of started with Rep. Wolarski reaching out to NSTA and to your office. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about how that kind of all came together there in the end of 2018.
Sure. As I'm sure you guys are aware, because this made national news, last October there was a horrific accident in Rochester, Indiana, where 3 children from the same family were killed by an oncoming driver early in the morning who failed to stop as these 3 children were crossing the road to board their school bus. This was in Congresswoman Wolarski's district, and as we've seen in past, accidents can produce advocates. So they reached out to us here at Prime and just said, hey, we want to do something about this. Can you help us? And we were, it's tragic that this is what had to happen to get a member engaged, but we worked with her office for over 4 months to develop what became the Stop for School Buses Act of 2019, because she really wanted to champion this issue, to be a leader on it. And the more she found out about what happened in her district, happens across the nation, We lose as many as 22 students a year this way. And we explained to her the annual survey that NSDIPS does, which estimated on one day that 83,000 vehicles were observed passing in an extrapolated over 180-day school year. As you see here, as many as 15 million vehicles are illegally passing school buses. So it's a big problem, even though it's against the law in all 50 states. So we began to craft this legislation, and she is a very passionate leader for us on this, and we take our leaders where we find them. But she has been a great kind of champion for this issue.
Yeah, it's been a really great collaboration in that she was compelled to take the action, and we were well positioned to support it, and the timing was right as well, too. So if you didn't come to the Bus-In, here's some of the details that are on the screen. Becky talked about the numbers and the frequency. The concept here, too, is one of defense by offense. So much legislation is reactionary, and everyone is familiar with the 2018 NTSB report relating to the 2016 fatal school bus accidents in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and Baltimore, Maryland, and the kind of the groundswell after that, because that was also when there was the fatal accident in Paramus, New Jersey, where there was a groundswell of, oh my gosh, we need to do something. And so much of that something was legislation that focused on safety technology being added to school buses. And, there was a lot of, I'll call it kitchen sink type legislation, both at the federal and the state level. And it would be everything from automatic braking to stability control to proximity sensors to cameras to, if you could put it on a bus, they wanted to mandate it. And, we took a look at this with Rep. Wolodarski and kind of recognized that, okay, if the goal is safety, keeping children safe, well, certainly the most dangerous area is not in the bus, it is around the bus. And illegal passing was really driving the horrific incidents that we saw. So the idea here is, well, let's address that most critical issue and thereby kind of avoid doing a lot of perhaps unfunded mandates on technology that should be added to school buses and focus on something that can make a difference. And that's what this act is all about. If you could go to the next slide, Hannah, we have some more details here about what the Stop for School Buses Act actually intends to do. And again, this was more detail that we kind of talked through here about who supported it. So we can go to the next slide here, Hannah, and we'll actually talk a little bit about the bill itself. It's a bipartisan legislation. And Becky, since again, you were kind of on the inside of this, if you want to run through this slide and tell us a little bit about what the bill does and doesn't do, why don't you run us through that?
Sure. I mean, the bill is really very straightforward. It's not complicated or complex. The only thing we struggle with on this is that we're basically looking for a federal response to basically what is a state and local traffic enforcement issue, because these illegal passing laws are all state laws. But so what we decided to do is go through the Department of Transportation and direct them to use their bully pulpit, if you will, which they are the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA, which is a modal administration of the U.S. DOT, is in charge of national highway traffic safety. I mean, that's their mandate from Congress. So we decided they would be the most appropriate federal agency to undertake the directives that the bill requires them to do. And there are basically these listed here: to, first of all, do a comprehensive review of all the issues involved with illegal passing and make recommendations to Congress on best practices. And that would include things like driver distraction and daylight savings time, lighting, location of bus stops, just everything that could affect this issue. We also ask them to review all of the state laws because they're all different, all the different enforcement mechanisms and penalties, and make best practices recommendations on those things. We ask them to look at all the various technologies that are being developed to address this problem. I know from talking with Congresswoman Walorski, she definitely thinks that technology is going to play a role ultimately in solving this problem and making it, completely a preventable issue in the future. And there's lots of different technologies out there, from cameras to audible systems to high-tech lighting, all kinds of things that are out there. We also ask them to look at driver education. As you all know, believe it or not, when people are stopped for this, particularly younger, newer drivers, sometimes their response more often than not is, well, I didn't know that I was supposed to stop. So we ask them to really look at driver education and whether that this particular issue needs to be beefed up in terms of that issue. And we also ask them to create a public safety messaging campaign. This would be along the lines of click it or ticket, all the drunk driving message campaigns you've seen over the years. NHTSA is very, very good at this particular thing, and we think it's time for them to do something on this issue in that regard. So that's basically what the bill does. There is no additional funding in the bill, so that resolves a lot of problems, particularly with conservative members. We're not, authorizing more money for any of this, and there are no mandates in this bill. It doesn't prejudge a solution. It simply asks them to really look at the plethora of issues involved with the problem and report back to Congress.
Super. So the legislation, like we said, is defense by offense. I mean, if we want to keep kids safe, then let's address where bad things are happening surrounding the bus, not in the bus, and this would be the way to do that. If we look at the next slide, Hannah, getting your message or the ask as simple as possible is the way to do that. Specifically, you want to reach out to your elected representatives in the Washington Senate and House of Representatives, and you want them to co-sponsor the Stop for School Buses Act of 2019 and support its passage or inclusion in an infrastructure surface transportation reauth bill. Basically, you want them to promote and support passage of this legislation in whatever format that takes. So that's the ask. It is fairly simple. And if we run through, again, the next slides, it's a little bit of a repeat of what we started off with. If you could look at the next slide, Hannah. It is, why Grassroots? I can tell you, and Becky can tell the story, we had 50 people go to Washington. So obviously we did not have one person from every single state, but we tried to cover as many of the important representatives as we could. If they sat on a specific transportation committee or perhaps appropriations or things like that, we targeted specific people that had specific interests or authorities. In some of those, that meant that we did not have someone in the meeting from their specific state. And I know we had one situation, Becky, where the actually was a staffer, got kind of sideways because nobody from their state was in the meeting.
Yeah, no one from their specific district. But it was it was fine. We worked that out.
And the reason I bring that up is that you do have that connection with your local representatives. When you contact them, you are someone that voted for them, and the people that work for you are people that voted or didn't vote for them, whatever the case is. You are their constituents, so you can be much more effective because you are their voter than a group of people going to Washington could be. If we look at the next slide, again, this is the knowing your target. Identify who your representatives are. If you're not familiar with who they are, then you can find out on the internet, things of that sort, and you can reach out to them with this message for your federal representatives in Washington. On the next slide, we go back and we looked at something like this where we talked about this actually in action. And Becky, I think that you were actually involved in the sleep apnea issue when that was kicking around. Was it a similar push as what we're doing with this piece of legislation?
We sure did. This was, many of you may remember this, about 5 years ago. There was a proposal coming out of the administration to really set up a very onerous and burdensome screening, testing, treatment mechanism for obstructive sleep apnea. That would have been very, very burdensome. And they tried to do it without going through the formal rulemaking process. We felt that was being caught in the normal DOT physicals, which I'm sure those of you who employ drivers are finding that to be the case. So we tried to get this stopped by talking to the administration, and they just said, this is a public health problem, and we're doing it. So we formed a coalition, reached out to our trucking brethren and other, really the entire commercial motor vehicle industry, including the Teamsters, which, sometimes when we can partner with labor, it is very, very helpful, particularly with Democrats on the Hill. And we formed a coalition, and NSTA was really the first to the Hill on this because we made it the Bus-In issue for that year and went around to Congress and through the Bus-In identified our champion who we volunteered to do a member letter over to the administration and raising concerns about what they were doing. And we got over 30 members on that letter. And then that led to legislation, which was passed that following year to prevent them from going forward. So another example of just, having to keep your nose to the wheel, and that depended on a lot of grassroots reach out by NSTA members, both at the Bus-In and after the Bus-In to get that legislation passed.
And the power of coalitions is important. While I talk about this, Hannah, you can go on to the next slide. It was similar with the UCR issue. It was an issue that didn't get much attention when it was brought by a single individual company to the UCR board, but when it was brought by a coalition of 25 school bus contractor associations, it did get different attention and different treatment. So, coalitions certainly are one way to amplify your power and your authority, but it's also a great way to get additional support. If you do approach a representative and they want feedback or data, typically NSTA can help you to find and provide that to them. Identifying the target, we talked about your local rep, and again, we can kind of go on to the next couple of slides here because they talk about how to identify your target. The websites that are available out there, and there are a number of them, but if you look at those that end in .gov, and you can go to the next slide, that's going to keep you a little safer than if you end up on other websites that are maybe trying to sell you services or do things like that. So look for those .gov websites when you're looking for a link to click on to try to find who either your local representative is or the local representatives of perhaps the employees that are within your organization. Because realize that, if they live in the next town over, they may have a different local representative. So you've got actually two people that you can provide this message to and that sort of thing as well. If you could give us the next slide there, Hannah. We talk about identifying the representative websites. See if they perhaps already are interested in school bus safety or driver safety or illegal passing. If they have something on their website that can be peripherally related to illegal passing. Again, perhaps it is motor vehicle safety in general, or perhaps it's their support of an initiative that is not specifically this one, but it is similar. You can make those connections in whatever information that you would put forth to them in an email or in a letter or in things of that sort. If you could give us the next slide there, Hannah. Setting a Google alert, and that Google alert, again, might help you identify when they're going to have a town hall, or might identify when they're going to be at an event, or if they've talked about it specifically, about this issue or something similar as well. On the next slide, Hannah, we talk about knowing your message, and we tried to get that message down to you as simple as possible. It was on this slide, but it's also in the materials that you're receiving in a PDF. Okay, the PDF is a multi-page, nicely put together piece of information that has both the summary of the bill itself. It has some detailed information about how dangerous the danger zone is in terms of injuries and things like that. It gives a rundown of the wide variety of state laws that are out there. And then it actually gives the text of the bill itself, H.R. 2218, which is the House of Reps bill. So in that one package, that one PDF, you're able to send that out to them. The last page of that is a co-sponsored Dear Colleague letter that was put out by Jackie Wolarski and Julie Brownlee asking for support. So again, this is a one-stop package that gives the detail about what your message is. If you could give us the next slide, Hannah. Connecting with your rep to deliver the message. I really recommend that you do pick up the phone, and whoever it is that you end up connecting with on the phone, explain to them why you're calling, who you are, the fact that you're a local employer, the fact that you are a member of NSTA, and that you're calling them about this pending legislation that you think that is important for the safety of school children across the country. Again, that's a spot where you can find out who on that person's staff is the right person to talk to. And you can get directed to them, and if you need to follow up, you've got a name and an email now and things of that sort. The letter or the email that you write, feel free to send a copy of that to NSTA info at yellowbuses.org, and we'll know kind of what's happening and can perhaps even support that effort and give you some guidance. And we'd love to hear if you're making progress and help you through that process, that sort of thing. On the next slide, Hannah, again, this is talking to your federal representatives about this particular piece of legislation. And regardless of what happens with this legislation, it would be wise to become familiar with them, because this is not going to be the only time that you have an interest in speaking with them about an issue. There's a lot of legislation that's pending at any given time that affects the school bus industry. So it may be that you're talking to them today about illegal stopping. It might be something else that you're talking about with them 3 or 6 months from now. And like Becky was saying, you don't want that to be your first reach out. I need help for you, from you now. You'd like it to be something that is easily supported and easily promoted. If you could give us the last slide, Hannah. This is kind of a little bit of a wrap up here, and that is, Grassroots is not as, it's probably more scary than it is complicated. It's out of some people's comfort zones, but what I can say is that it's something that you have to kind of just dive into and do that. NSTA has had good success with grassroots advocacy in the past, and we talked a little bit about the sleep apnea issue. Last year, we were on the Hill advocating that the Department of Education should use NSTA resources on its website to help school districts understand their cost of transportations, and that was also a success. We actually have NSTA tools on the Department of Education website now. Again, the steps in the process are just knowing who your audience is, who your reps are, understand the message you're trying to get across, connect with your representatives to deliver the message, and don't make it a once and done event. Make it something that every year you invite them to the appreciation breakfast of the contractor, of the drivers that you have. And if they do come, maybe the local newspaper shows up to take photos and do that kind of stuff as well. That's the wrap up of the presentation. I can throw it to both Kurt and Becky here to add anything they might want to add, and then I can open it up to the floor if there are some questions. So, Kurt, I'll throw it to you. Is there anything that you want to add here?
Yeah, the one thing about the industry that I think is a real benefit is that there's a plethora of statistical data to use, but also feel free to use that anecdotal evidence as well. If you've had drivers who've had close calls, remember that it's ultimately lobbying and legislative advocacy is a people-to-people business. And while the statistics are always nice to have, the anecdotal evidence, in my experience, tends to move the needle a bit more, especially when you can put a face or a place or a name to, say, a high school. This happened at a high school or near a high school in the district. It brings it back closer to home, as we talked about. All politics is local. So, like I said, feel free, as appropriate, to use anecdotal evidence in your discussions with legislators, and remember that this is a people-to-people business, and those relationships are just critical.
That's great. Becky, what are your thoughts on kind of wrapping this all up?
Just to wrap up on the Stop Act, we are really heavy right now into contacting your members. We're trying to build co-sponsors for the bill, and we haven't mentioned on this webinar, but most of you know we also have a companion Senate bill that's identical to the Walorski bill that was introduced by Senator Todd Young from Indiana and Gary Peters from Michigan. So right now, as of this morning, we have a total of 26 House members who have signed on to the House bill, and we have 4 senators. We'd really like to build those numbers. And so those of you on the call, if you're can contact your members and ask them to go on this bill, use the PDF. You can send that to the staffer. We say this is a mom and apple pie and Chevrolet kind of bill. It's not controversial, and we really like to get those numbers way up. We'll probably have to see this bill included in a broader piece of legislation, but if we get the co-sponsors, in the hundreds range, then it's possible, difficult, but still possible that maybe we could get the committees of jurisdiction to move it on its own, which would be the ideal situation. So we really need help in building the co-sponsors.
Yeah, that would be ideal. And I completely forgot that we have another fresh perspective and good resource in Hannah. Hannah had actually worked in Representative Beck's office in New Jersey. And did intern there for a while, and was one of those staffers that would listen to people like us. So Hannah, let me not miss our additional resource. Is there anything you can add from your perspective?
So obviously, emailing and calling is the best way to really get your message across. And like Becky had mentioned, don't be alarmed that you're talking to maybe even a 20, 21-year-old. They are the one that's going to advance your cause to your representative or senator, and you really want to make nice with them. You want them to support your cause. And like I said, they're the ones that are looking through the emails. They're handling the phones. They're listening to you. So I encourage you to not be put off or not be abrasive when you get someone younger on the phone. We take a lot of calls. So the more concise you can make it and the more easy it is to understand. And like I said, don't be abrasive or put off that you have to talk with somebody so young. I strongly encourage you to keep all of that in mind when you're reaching out. It's difficult. I understand that. But like I said, we got a lot of phone calls each and every day, and the messages that were well put together and concise were worth pursuing and funneling on to our reps. So, yeah. Thanks,
Good.
Rich.
No. Hey, no, that's good. Hannah does all the hard work around here, so we should definitely listen to her. Well, that's super. Now we've got a few people on the line, and Hannah, I don't know if they've typed in messages or if there are messages, or if you can open it up for questions.
I can. So everyone is unmuted, but I do have a question, Becky. So I know on the previous slide it said we were at 18 House co-sponsors and 3 Senate co-sponsors. Have those numbers increased? And really, what is our target goal for those numbers? What do we want those to look like?
Yes, as of this morning, we're at 26 in the House and 4. So they have increased in the last week. Every week we're adding a few on it seems on each bill. We really, the ideal number, if you wanted to have a majority in the House, is 218, which is the majority number in the House. Now that's really hard to get, but a personal goal, I think we should be in the hundreds. We should be in the triple digits on this bill, and that would be enough to get the attention of the committees. That's on the House bill. On the Senate side, if we could get to 25 or 30, that's probably enough on that side to get the attention that we're seeking. It is much harder to get senators to co-sponsor bills. There's less of them, and they're a little bit more hesitant to jump on things without a real thorough review. A third of them are up for re-election every 2 years, so it is a little harder to get bigger numbers in the Senate, but certainly not impossible. Especially on a bill like this, I think it's very achievable. We also are, just so y'all know, reaching out to broaden our coalition, as Rich mentioned. Coalitions. We're just one industry trying to get this done, and we're trying to bring some more firepower to the table by reaching out to the law enforcement community, the emergency responder community, and as well as the education and school community to see if they would be willing to lend their support to the bill. And we're just beginning those efforts, but hopefully you'll see those going forward, that will be broadening the coalition for this bill.
Great. That's good stuff all around. Are there any questions from participants? Okay. Super. Well, I'll tell you, I really appreciate everybody who dialed in to listen. Make sure you take advantage of the documents that are attached here. If you have any trouble accessing those, call into the office, and Hannah will be able to help you out. I want to thank Becky for making time to talk to us from Washington, and really appreciate not only the detailed support today, but bringing this issue into being, from Rep. Wolarski's call, and for all the organizing work at the Bus-In in Washington as well. And thanks to Kurt. Delighted to have you here and on board as well. So I'll wrap it up with 5 minutes to spare. And again, look forward to seeing you guys either at the annual convention or the next time we're together on a conference call. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Rich.
Sure thing. Thank you too, Becky. Take care, everybody.
Take care. Thanks again for hopping on, Becky.
Oh, sure. I think it went all right. It's hard to tell when we don't get any feedback, but
I know. So it sounded like Michelle wrote in and said that this has been very helpful, and she hopes that there's a session at the annual meeting to mirror this. So I did tell her that you're doing a session at annual meeting on Grassroots.
That's right. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'll try and get this webinar together, and maybe we can get this out, like I said, in a constant contact so we can keep it going. It's a shame not more people hopped on, but we'll see what traction we can get from it.
Okie dokie.
All right. Well, thanks again, Becky. I'll talk to you soon.
Yeah. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.